My name is Paige. I'm 32 years old. 3 days ago, I sat across a conference table from my father, a lawyer, and a document that was supposed to take the last thing my grandfather ever left me. Instead, I reached into my bag, set one piece of paper on that table, and watched my father's hands start shaking. He hadn't spoken to me in 2 years. Not a birthday text, not a phone call, nothing. Then his lawyer sent me a letter asking me to sign away my grandfather's lake house, the only place in the world that ever felt like home. What my father didn't know, what no one knew, was that 7 years ago my grandfather had already decided how this story would end, and he'd left me the proof in a sealed envelope I'd been too afraid to open. I grew up outside Knoxville, Tennessee, small town, the kind where your business was never really your own. My father, Gerald, managed the local bank branch, firm handshake, pressed shirts to church. My mother, Diane, ran the women's Bible study and organized the annual harvest potluck. Together they looked like the frame photo at Hobby Lobby. And then there was my little sister Meredith, 3 years younger, always 3 steps ahead in their eyes. Meredith got piano lessons. I got maybe next year. She got a Honda Civic at 16. I got a bus pass and a suggestion to ask around about part-time work. My father had a line he used whenever I brought it up. He'd set down his fork, look at me like I was being unreasonable, and say, "Meredith needs more help. You're the strong one, Paige. That's what I like about you." I believed him for years. I wore strong like a badge of honor. What I didn't understand yet was that in my father's vocabulary, strong didn't mean admirable. It meant low maintenance. It meant she won't complain. It meant she's not worth the effort. I was the first person in my family to graduate college, accounting degree, state university, earned while working 25 hours a week, no help, no cosigner on my student loans, just me and an alarm clock set for 5:15 every morning. My parents said they'd come. My mother picked the outfit she'd wear. My father asked what time parking opened. I reserved 4 seats, two for them, one for Meredith and one for my grandfather, Howard Afton, the only person in my family who had never once made me feel like an afterthought. The morning of graduation, my phone rang at 7 a.m. Something came up, my father said. "Your sister's moving into her new apartment. She needs help with the furniture." I could hear my mother in the background asking where the tape gun was. "It's just a ceremony, honey. You already have the degree." I walked across that stage alone, sat in a row of strangers' families, took my own photo on a timer propped against a bench. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Grandpa Howard. "I'm proud of you, Paige," he said, his voice rough around the edges the way it always got when he was trying not to cry. "Don't worry, I already took care of it." I thought he meant a graduation card, maybe a check tucked inside. I wouldn't understand what he meant for another 7 years. I met Daniel when I was 26. He was rewiring the office building where I just started as a junior accountant, and I heard him before I saw him, singing under his breath while tracing conduit behind the ceiling tiles, something by Johnny Cash, off-key but committed. Daniel was an electrician, licensed, bonded, running his own operation out of a second-hand van with his name stenciled on the side. He worked 14-hour days, his hands were calloused, his boots were scuffed, and on our third date, he brought me wildflowers from a gas station because the florist was closed, and he refused to show up empty handed. We got married when I was 28, courthouse steps, small ceremony, and Grandpa Howard had passed 3 years earlier, and I still felt the hole he left every time something good happened because I couldn't call him to tell him about it. My parents came to the wedding briefly, and the following week at a family dinner, my father looked across the roast chicken at Daniel and said, with the kind of calm that makes you doubt you heard it right, "I thought you'd aim higher, Paige. An electrician." "That's a downgrade." My mother pressed her lips together. Meredith scrolled her phone. Daniel didn't flinch. On the drive home, he stared at the road and said, "I don't need your dad to respect my job, but I need him to respect you." I wanted to cut contact right then, but Grandpa Howard had only been gone 3 years, and something in me kept holding on, some stubborn belief that he'd want me to keep trying, keep showing up, keep being the strong one. So I stayed a little while longer. It was Christmas when it ended. 15 people packed into my parents' living room, the kind of crowd where someone's always refilling the sweet tea. Meredith pulled me into the kitchen. She needed $5,000. Third time she'd asked. The first 2 loans, her word, not mine, were still unpaid. I said no, politely, clearly. She walked back into the living room with wet eyes and a trembling lip. My father stood up from his recliner like he'd been spring-loaded. "What kind of sister refuses to help her own family?" He said it loud enough for the room to hear. Aunt Linda froze mid-pour over the punch bowl. My cousin Rachel looked at me with wide eyes. "You've changed, Paige, and not for the better." Then my mother leaned toward my Aunt Carol, conspiratorial just loud enough. "She's been like this since she married that man. I honestly think she needs professional help." The room went still. 15 people. Not one opened their mouth. I stood in the center of that room and felt something I hadn't felt since graduation day. Invisible, surrounded by people, and completely alone. I put on my coat, kissed my cousin Rachel's baby on the forehead. Daniel was already at the door with his keys, and I walked out of that house for the last time. Silence is a strange thing. You'd think cutting off a toxic family would feel like relief, and some of it did. But silence isn't empty. It's full of the things other people fill it with. Within weeks of that Christmas, my parents had a story and they told it to everyone. Gerald called relatives, Diane cornered friends at church, and the narrative was clean and simple. Paige is mentally unstable. Daniel is isolating her from the family. She needs professional help. My cousin Rachel called in January. "Your mom told me you're seeing a therapist. She said you had some kind of episode at Christmas. Are you okay?" I had never told anyone I was seeing a therapist because I wasn't. My mother had fabricated it out of thin air and served it to people who trusted her. My father called my former boss to check in on me, and in a town that small, a call like that isn't concern. It's a grenade with a polite fuse. Rachel told me later that my father had described me to relatives as possibly a danger to herself. He weaponized mental health language against his own daughter because she refused to hand over $5,000 and sit quietly, while her mother called her defective in front of the family. One by one, the calls stopped. The circle pulled tight around Gerald and Diane, and I was on the outside of it. Daniel and I moved 45 minutes east, close enough to drive back if I ever wanted to, far enough that I didn't have to see my father at the hardware store. On Saturdays, I got promoted. Daniel's business grew. We bought a small house with a porch and a backyard and a kitchen window that caught the morning light. It was a quiet life, a good life. But every Christmas, I'd catch myself staring at my phone, hovering over names I couldn't bring myself to delete, and no one called, not once. One night, Daniel found me on the couch, scrolling, sat beside me with some game on mute, and just stayed there. And after a while, I asked him, "Do you think I made a mistake?" He didn't hesitate. "You'll know when you're ready. And if that day never comes, that's okay, too." Then on a Tuesday in March, 2 years after that Christmas dinner, an envelope arrived with a law firm return address I'd never seen, my name typed on the front, and it sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days before I could bring myself to open it. Because if you've ever cut contact with someone in your family and then gotten that unexpected letter, you know the feeling, that cold drop in your stomach. I opened it Thursday morning, coffee still hot, house still quiet, one page, a Mr. Brennan attorney at law writing on behalf of Gerald Afton, who was initiating the sale of 14 Cedar Mill Road, Grandpa Howard's lake house, and as a potential heir to the estate, I was being asked to sign a quitclaim deed waiving any claim to the property, 30-day deadline, signature line at the bottom with my name typed beneath it. I read it 3 times. 2 years, not a birthday card, not a single text, and the first time my family reached out, it came through a law firm asking me to hand over the last thing Grandpa Howard ever touched. I set the letter down and looked across the kitchen at the small wooden shelf Daniel had built above the stove, and on it sat Grandpa Howard's old fishing tackle box, cedar wood, brass hinges, his initials carved into the lid, still smelling like lake water and linseed oil. And tucked inside against the bottom was a sealed envelope I'd kept for 7 years, yellowed paper taped shut, his handwriting on the front, "For Paige, when you need it." I'd never opened it. I'd always told myself it was a goodbye letter, something sentimental, something that would make me cry, and I wasn't ready to cry that night. For the first time in 7 years, I opened it. My hands were steady until I tore the seal. Inside were 2 things. The first was a legal document, heavy paper, stamped and notarized. The heading reading Irrevocable Trust Deed, Howard R. Afton Family Trust. And below it in clean type, the property at 14 Cedar Mill Road had been placed in an irrevocable trust. The trustee was Mr. Calloway, who was Grandpa Howard's personal attorney, and the sole beneficiary was listed on page 3, page Ellen Afton. The second item was a single sheet of notebook paper, folded twice. His handwriting slanted and deliberate, and it said, "Paige, I know your father. He means well, but he doesn't see straight when it comes to your sister. This house is yours. It's always been yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Grandpa H." I sat on the bedroom floor with my back against the dresser, and I cried. Not the kind of crying that breaks you apart, the kind that puts something back together, because he knew, before I ever walked out of that Christmas dinner, before I ever met Daniel, before I ever stopped answering my father's calls, Grandpa Howard saw it. All of it. And he didn't just feel sorry for me, he did something about it. The next morning, I called Mr. Calloway, who answered on the second ring and told me the trust was valid, never been challenged, and my father's name didn't appear anywhere in the documents. and I spent the next 5 days preparing the way an accountant prepares for an audit. Documents in rows, facts verified, nothing left to assumption. I pulled the county clerk's records online, confirmed the transfer date, compared it against the probate records, and confirmed what Calloway had told me. The lake house was transferred into the trust before Howard died. It never passed through probate. Gerald never inherited it. He just assumed he did. And nobody ever told him otherwise because the only person who knew was Grandpa Howard. And Grandpa Howard had his reasons. The night before the meeting, Rachel called and told me my father had co signed all of Meredith's business loans, refinanced the mortgage on their own house 8 months ago, and put the money into the boutique. Now the boutique was tanking, the loans were due, and he owed the bank around $180,000 on his personal guarantee, and he had found a buyer for the lake house at $320,000, enough to cover everything. And the only thing standing between him and that sale was my signature. Paige, he told everyone you'd sign, Rachel said. He said Paige has no use for that house anyway. Friday came. I set Grandpa Howard's tackle box on the passenger seat, tucked the folder of trust documents into my bag, and drove 45 minutes back to the town I'd left behind. Past the Shell station where Grandpa Howard used to buy me chocolate milkshakes every Friday, past the middle school where I once won a spelling bee and no one from my family was in the audience because Meredith had a dance recital the same night, past the intersection where Grandpa Howard's pickup used to idle with the window down and the radio on. Brennan's office was on the second floor of a red brick building on Main Street above a dental practice, the stairwell smelling like old carpet and coffee that had been sitting on a warmer since dawn. And the receptionist looked me over with rehearsed sympathy, the kind of look people use when they've already heard a version of your story and decided who the villain is. I sat in a vinyl chair next to a fern that was losing the will to live, opened my bag, checked the folder one last time. Trust deed, certified copy, county filing receipt, Calloway's card with his direct number, circled in pen, Grandpa Howard's handwritten letter in a clear sleeve, closed the folder, rested my hands on top of it, my heart steady, my breathing even, because I'd spent 2 years being called unstable by people who couldn't keep a boutique open for 18 months, and I could handle a conference room. Brennan called my name. I walked through the door, and there at the far end of the table, with his hands folded and his shirt pressed, was my father. Gerald looked up. Same jaw, same posture, same way of holding a room like he'd already measured it and found it acceptable. Hello, Paige. Calm, warm even, the concerned father register pitched just low enough to sound caring, just controlled enough to remind you who's in charge. I stopped 2 steps inside the doorway and looked at Brennan. I was told this was a meeting between me and your office. Brennan adjusted his tie. Mr. Afton asked to be present. I thought it might facilitate things. I repeated the word the way you'd hold up a garment in the wrong size, studied it, set it back on the rack, then sat down across from my father, set my folder on the table, and didn't open it. Gerald leaned forward, elbows on the mahogany, and smiled. Let's get this done quick. I know you're busy. I know things have been difficult, but this isn't about us. This is about the house. Your grandfather would have wanted this. He used Grandpa Howard's name. He sat across from me in a lawyer's conference room the first time we'd been in the same space in 2 years, and he used the name of the one person who ever stood in my corner to try to move me out of it. My fingers rested on the edge of my folder, and that was when I knew this was never going to end unless I ended it. Not with anger, not with a scene, but with the truth sitting in a manila folder on a conference table waiting to be read. Gerald moved into sales mode, the same cadence he used at the bank explaining loan terms to people who didn't read the fine print. The house has been sitting empty for years. No one's using it. I've got a buyer ready to close at 320. Your sister's business needs a bridge loan, and this solves the problem clean. Brennan slid the quitclaim deed across the table. I picked it up, read every word, every clause. The room quiet, except for my father tapping his index finger against the table. Rhythm he probably didn't know he was making. I set the document down. You haven't asked me how I am. Gerald blinked. What? In 2 years, this is the first contact I've had from this family, and it came through a law firm. You didn't call. You didn't write. You sent a lawyer. He shifted in his seat. We've been trying to reach you. My phone number hasn't changed. Brennan cleared his throat. Gerald ignored him. Paige, I'm not here to rehash the past. I'm here to handle a piece of property, that's all. And if I don't sign? The tapping stopped. Gerald's jaw tightened. Then we all wait longer. It costs everyone more money. Don't make this complicated, Paige. Don't make this complicated. The same man who told 15 people I was mentally unwell, the same man who skipped my graduation, the same man who called my husband a downgrade. I leaned back in my chair. Before I do anything, I'd like to understand why I wasn't told about the sale before a lawyer sent me a letter. Gerald shifted, turned to Brennan the way a man turns to a witness stand. We haven't been able to reach her. She cut off the entire family 2 years ago. No explanation. No explanation. Diane and I have tried everything. He shook his head slowly, performing sadness the way he performed everything, with structure. She's been going through a difficult time. Her husband, he dropped his voice a notch, has been a bit controlling. We worry about her environment. Same playbook, same stage directions, same script, word for word, 2 years later. I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct the record. I didn't list the receipts. I looked at my father, held his gaze, and said, Are you done? Something shifted in his face. The smile didn't disappear. It froze, like a projector catching on a frame. Then his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, held up a finger, answered it, and in a room that quiet, you didn't need the speaker. Meredith's voice came through, sharp and thin. Did she sign yet? Dad, I need to know by Monday. The landlord's threatening to change the locks. Gerald cupped his hand over the phone. I'm handling it. Give me an hour. But Meredith was already mid-sentence. Just tell her it's for the family. She always caves when you say that. The words landed in the center of the table like a glass hitting hardwood. Gerald ended the call, his neck flushed red from the collar up. Brennan was looking at his legal pad, and I folded my hands. She always caves when you say that, I repeated quietly, word for word. Gerald set the phone face down. She's under a lot of pressure. Don't take it. I'm not taking anything. I'm just listening. I looked at Brennan. His pen had stopped moving. And I reached into my bag, pulled the folder onto the table, opened it, and slid the first page face up across the mahogany with a soft hiss of good paper on polished wood. Gerald looked down. The bold header was impossible to miss. Irrevocable trust deed. Howard R. Afton, Family Trust. This is an irrevocable trust deed, I said, filed 7 years ago by Howard Afton with the county clerk's office. It names me Paige Afton as sole beneficiary of the lake house property. The trustee is Mr. Calloway, Grandpa Howard's attorney. I pushed the full document. All 8 pages, certified copy, county stamp on the front, to the center of the table. You're welcome to read it. The silence that followed had weight. It pressed against the walls of that conference room like a held breath. Gerald didn't touch the papers. His eyes moved from the document to my face and back again, as though he was waiting for one of them to explain the other. Brennan reached for the trust deed immediately, turned to the first page, read it, turned to the second, read that too, then removed his glasses, pressed the bridge of his nose, and set the document down very carefully as though it might detonate. And he looked at Gerald the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray when the break is worse than expected. Mr. Afton, Brennan said, the formality in his voice new. Were you aware that your father established an irrevocable trust for this property? Gerald's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That can't be right. The house was part of his estate. It came to me through probate. Brennan read the filing date from the document and looked back at Gerald. According to this, the property was transferred to the trust 3 years before your father passed away. If this is accurate, and the county filing stamp suggests it is, the lake house would not have passed through probate. It would have been excluded from the estate entirely. That's impossible. Brennan dialed Calloway on the conference room speaker. 2 rings. Calloway's voice came through, measured and unhurried, the voice of a man who had been expecting this call for 7 years, and he confirmed everything. He drafted the trust himself. It was executed and filed with the county 7 years ago. Howard Afton funded it with the lake house property during his lifetime. Paige Afton is the sole named beneficiary. The property has never been part of the Howard Afton estate and did not pass through probate. Brennan set down his pen and turned to Gerald with the careful posture of a man delivering news he didn't want to deliver. Mr. Afton, I'm going to have to pause this proceeding. The quit claim deed I prepared is not applicable. Miss Afton has no claim to waive because the property was never in your father's estate to begin with. And if you've represented to the buyer that you hold clear title to this property, that could create a separate legal issue. Gerald pushed back from the table. You planned this. You've been sitting on this for 7 years, waiting. I didn't plan anything. I didn't even open that envelope until your lawyer sent me a letter. You brought me here. Dad? The word hit the room. Wrong. Dad? I hadn't called him that in 2 years, and it landed heavier than I expected for both of us. Gerald pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, and when he pulled them away, I saw something I hadn't prepared for. He looked old, not just tired, diminished, like someone had pulled a single thread and the whole pattern was unraveling. Paige, you don't understand? His voice cracked. If I can't sell the house, your sister, the business. I co-signed everything, your mother and I refinanced the house. We could lose it. Our house. I heard the desperation. I did. And part of me, the part that spent 18 years trying to earn his attention, wanted to reach across the table, but I stayed where I was. You co signed Meredith's loans. You refinanced your mortgage for her store. You put everything on the line for her. And in all that time, not once did you call to ask how I was doing. And now you want me to give up the one thing Grandpa Howard left me to fix a problem I wasn't part of creating. He would have wanted us to be a family. He would have wanted you to be a father to both your daughters. Brennan adjourned the meeting. I collected the trust documents, placed them back in my folder, and the quitclaim deed still sat in the center of the table, unsigned, like a check that bounced. I stopped at the door. Gerald said one word, please. Stripped of posture, stripped of strategy, just a man in a conference room who had run out of moves. I looked at him, and for a second, just a second, I saw the version of him from before. The man who taught me to ride a bike on Cedar Mill Road, who let me steer the boat even though I always went too far left, who once when I was 7 carried me a quarter mile through the rain because I'd lost my shoe in the mud, and he didn't want me walking barefoot. That man existed. He just got buried somewhere under the spreadsheets and the favoritism and the fear of Meredith failing. You know my number, I said. It hasn't changed. I walked through the lobby, past the receptionist, down the stairwell that smelled like old carpet, out the front door, and sat in my car for 5 minutes with the engine off and my hands on the wheel. Not feeling victorious, just tired, the kind of tired that 2 years of silence doesn't fix. They left the lake house within 72 hours. Gerald packed the car. Diane collected the dishes she'd brought from home. Meredith carried out a bag of groceries she'd stocked the fridge with like she was moving in for good. And they drove away from the lake house the same way they'd driven away from my life, without telling me, without looking back, without once considering that the house had never been theirs to claim. A week later, I drove out to Cedar Mill Road on a Thursday afternoon, the sky flat and gray, the kind of Tennessee spring sky that can't decide between rain and surrender, and the front door was unlocked. The place smelled like dust and old pine. Diane had wiped down the counters before she left, and on the kitchen table, Gerald had left a single key and a torn piece of lined paper with handwriting smaller than I remembered. This was never about the money. Dad. I read it, folded it, put it in my coat pocket, and walked down to the dock. The boards creaking under my weight, Grandpa Howard's green Adirondack chair sitting where it always had facing the water, and I sat in it. The lake was still. A heron crossed the cove, low and unhurried, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The numbers caught up with Gerald the way numbers always do, quietly and then all at once. Without the lake house sale, the $320,000 lifeline evaporated. The buyer walked. Meredith's boutique closed by June. Gerald sold his truck and pulled from his 401k early and scraped together just enough to cover the personal guarantee, but not enough to undo the damage. And retirement, which he'd planned for 62, got pushed to 67, maybe later. Daniel and I started fixing up the lake house in May. Fresh coat of stain on the dock, new screens on the porch. The bathroom faucet that had dripped since I was 12 finally got a new cartridge. Daniel handled the electrical and installed a porch light that actually turned on when you flipped the switch. And he said, grinning covered in attic dust, It's what I do. I found Grandpa Howard's woodworking tools in the garage hanging on a pegboard he'd built himself, each one in its place. Chisels lined up by size, hand planes oiled and wrapped, a half finished birdhouse on the workbench, like he'd stepped away for lunch and just never came back, and in a box beneath the workbench, I found photographs. Me at 6 years old, standing on the dock with a bass almost as long as my arm. Grandpa Howard behind me, both hands raised, laughing, his hat pushed back, his flannel rolled to the elbows. I held that photo for a long time. He didn't leave me a house. He left me proof that I mattered, that someone in my family saw me clearly, not as the strong one, not as the low maintenance one, not as the one who doesn't need anything, but as Paige, his granddaughter, worth protecting. I framed it and hung it on the kitchen wall, right above the window, where the afternoon light comes in, warm and gold. And every time I look at it, I hear his voice on the phone the day I graduated. I already took care of it. A month after the meeting at Brennan's office, I sat at the kitchen table in the lake house and wrote a letter by hand. Not through a law firm, not through Rachel, just me and a pen and a piece of paper. And I wrote to Gerald and Diane. I'm not writing to punish you. I'm writing to be clear. The lake house stays in the trust. That was Grandpa Howard's decision, and I intend to honor it. If there's a version of our relationship that can be rebuilt, it doesn't start with paperwork. It starts with honesty. It starts with you seeing me, not as the strong one, not as the one who can handle it, not as the one who doesn't need anything, but as your daughter. My door is open, but only if you walk through it as my parents, not as people who need something from me. I addressed the envelope, stamped it, and dropped it in the mailbox at the end of Cedar Mill Road. I didn't wait for a reply. I'd said what I needed to say. The rest was up to them. I used to think boundaries were walls, things you build when you're angry to keep people out. But I don't think that anymore. Boundaries are doors. You choose who walks through. You choose the terms. And if someone stands at the other side and knocks with clean hands and an honest voice, you open it, but you don't leave it propped open for people who only show up when they need the key. It's a Friday afternoon, and I'm sitting on the dock in Grandpa Howard's green Adirondack chair. The one I sanded when I was 10, the one I painted the first coat on. The wood, warm from the sun, the lake flat, somewhere across the cove. A fish breaks the surface, and the ripple stretches out in slow, patient circles. Daniel is inside making coffee. I can hear the kettle through the open window and the low hum of the porch light he installed last weekend. I've got Grandpa Howard's old fishing rod in my hands, the one with the cork grip he wrapped himself and the reel that clicks when you cast. I haven't caught anything all afternoon, and I don't care. I talk to him sometimes, not out loud, just in my head, the way you do with people who left the room but never really left. Hey, Grandpa, I found your envelope. I found the trust. I found the letter. The wind answers, thank you. My name is Paige Afton. I'm 32 years old. 2 years ago, my family's lawyer sent me one document, and that document didn't give me anything I didn't already have. It just reminded me that someone had already decided I was worth protecting, and that was enough.